The Rev Canon Mark Oakley is a friend of mine going back more than 20 years. He's known me since before I was ordained. He was the chaplain to the Bishop of London when I went through the ordination process. And then one day he came and sat next to me at a diocesan function in London. I was about 29. And he said, "That job that came up at St. Saviour's Pimlico, are you putting your name in?" And I had been thinking about it, but was thinking, no, that's too much for me. And he said, "I think you should." I'm grateful to him for that. And then since I've been here in the United States of America, he has done many things. He has been archdeacon in Germany and Northern Europe. He has been the Canon Chancellor of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where he led their public dialogues and also helped to develop art programs in the cathedral. And now he is the Dean of Chapel of St. John's College in Cambridge. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him to preach for us today. I'm going to stop talking and hand over to the Rev Canon Mark Oakley.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, and I think please be seated if you're not already. Well, it's great to be with you, and I'm not used to preaching at 5:30 in the afternoon, so thank you for giving me this challenge. There was once a bishop here in England who left a rather unusual note in his will. He asked for it to be read out to all of his clergy on his death. It was very short and it was in verse, and it simply said, "Tell my priests when I am gone, O me to shed no tears, for I shall be no deader then than they have been for years." Well, it's true that not all clergy are exactly fireflies in the dark night of this world, but I must say I've known your dean, as you've just heard, for many years now, and I'm delighted that you've nabbed him, because he'll be a great friend and a great pastor to you. I know that. And it's great, as I've been watching you on the screen here, to see you together. So, you've been asked to preach a sermon to a lot of people you don't know on the other side of the world, and you've got a few minutes maximum. You're quickly taking comfort in the words of Quentin Crisp, that if at first you don't succeed, failure may be your style. So what are you going to say? Face it, you're a bit on edge, because every time you sat down to start writing, your heart started to beat a bit quicker, and that's a little bit uncomfortable. Well, tell them why. Tell them that it wasn't that long ago that you had chest pain going up some stairs, that you ended up in the heart hospital having a lead put in your groin and then up into your heart, that the doctor turned the screen around and said, "Take a look, you're a lucky man, Mr. Oakley. You had about 3 months left." Tell them how you looked at that screen, looking like a sat-nav of veins and arteries, and for the first time really, realized you are a body, that although you live in your head, in words and ideas, you are a fragile, time-limited body, dependent on that strange pulsing miracle on the screen over your head. Tell them how you asked the doctor if he would kindly stop talking and get on with it then. He laughed, and then he placed a tiny stent to open up the artery so that your blood could flow free and fast. Tell them how you had to look away from the monitor. At that point, you wanted to live by faith and not by sight. You just hoped the doctor had the opposite view. Tell them it was that day, after crying with relief, that it looked as if you'd be okay now, lying on that hospital bed, that you made 1 or 2 decisions. You decided first to enter a civil partnership after having been a bit fearful before of what it might do to your future ministry in the Church of England. That day, you didn't really care much about that anymore. You just wanted to acknowledge the love which has carried you through many years of your life. The person even now holding your hand in the recovery ward, saying, "It's okay, we're still here." I asked him there and then. It was that day too, when he'd gone home, that I said to God in a voice I felt was actually me, "We're alone now. Can we please start again?" We heard St. Paul just now. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? I felt I was there with Paul that night in those sentiments. It took a hospital bed, though, to get me to see that the things that matter most in this world, love, relationship, connection, trust, wisdom, these are the things that increase as they are shared. The more you give of these, the more you have. They're unlike wealth and power, where if I win, you lose. In all the things that we know matter more than anything else, the truth is that if I win, so do you. Tell them in that sermon it puzzles you why it took you so long to see that you had to be distilled, that now if you understand anything these days, it's that this is the truth that Christian faith celebrates. God gives us our being, and what we give back in return for it is our becoming, who we become in the time we have left. God, from time to time, changes our full stops into commas, loving us just as we are, but loving us so much he doesn't want us to stay like that. Loving so we can become more, so that we can learn that the more you give, the more you get. It's what grace means, I think, receiving more than you deserve. And it's what our world at the moment seems to lack, making us a world where, as has been said, if we're not at the table, we're probably on the menu. A world much more intent, it seems, on making us consumers than citizens. Where is the one who is wise? Well, you will have gone on for a few minutes, so begin to end your sermon by telling them that months have passed since that little procedure. Churchy stuff doesn't hold the same interest it once did, but tell them how that when the doctors told you you needed some repair work in your heart, you sense that God agreed, and that it's still true, your work in progress, trying to make a life of some love and some courage. Being a priest still feels like I'm trying to help other people have a relationship with God that I only wish I had myself. But those people sitting in Sacramento might be surprised to know that you've at last begun to go back to the teachings of the one you once made some promises to. And those teachings sound a bit different now. The blessed ones on this earth are the humbled, those who've got some mercy in their heart, those who carry and share peace, those who hunger to see what is right come about by facing their fears, those who mourn and have experienced loss in their life, those who know their need of God. That story of Jesus cleansing the temple we heard just now is found in all four of the Gospels, but in Matthew, Mark and Luke, Jesus does this radical thing at the end of his ministry. And so you find the story just before the Passion begins. It triggers his enemies into arresting Jesus. But we heard John's account, and John places it at the very beginning of his Gospel, telling us that Jesus did it right at the beginning of his ministry, a dramatic entry, as it were, into public life. For John, this event says something about Jesus that must be made clear right from the outset. And it's a very dramatic portrait of Jesus in John. Only John tells us that Jesus used a whip on that occasion. This isn't Jesus meek and mild. This is an angry Jesus. And those of you who know famous paintings of this scene by El Greco or Bassano or some African depictions know that artists often put Jesus in red clothing to suit his mood. Nothing can mask the face of God so much as religion, said Martin Buber, thinking, I think, of repressive religious practices and dogmas, unjust social systems, and loads of hypocrisy. Of course, we need to be reconverted every day if we're not to allow our religiosity to become a substitute for a relationship with God. The whole story reminds us of words from Jeremiah, who condemned people who imagined they could use religion to somehow hide from God. And indeed, Jeremiah had denounced the temple itself, not merely its uses. You can't go to the temple and think everything is fine with God if you then leave it and lead a life that's indifferent to suffering or justice or your relationships. In the Bible, God never seems to have much trouble with his enemies. It's his friends who give him fits. And as Luther once said, the curses of the godless sometimes sound better to God's ear than the hallelujahs of the pious. We need to be converted again to that inner landscape of Christ's heart, because the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. We need to hear, not listen. We need to hear deep within his words and his life, not a relevance for today, but a resonance for every day, every generation, every human heart. I'm afraid it took a hospital bed, not a whip, in my case, but he had a very hard case to deal with me, I think. So end, and tell them in your last sentence, you just know that when the Welsh poet R.S. Thomas said that a poem is what reaches the intellect by way of the heart, you think he was speaking of God too. At least for you, that strange day your heart became the focus, and you realized you wanted to love better your partner, your family, your friends, even those you have yet to meet, perhaps on the other side of the world. Oh, and God.